The Houthis and Iran have dominated headlines for years. There's also another front in this war for the land, and the weapon is a grapevine. CBN Middle East reporter Joshua Swanson explains.
Something strange is happening in the Judean hills. Where prophets spoke fire and kings raised armies, rows of vines now climb the rocky slopes. The ground looks too dry to dream, yet green threads push through, fed by stubborn hope more than rain. Farmers call it rebirth. Neighbors call it risk. On calendars and maps, this place is a border. In ancient scrolls, it was promise. Every vine planted here feels like a line drawn between earth and heaven. Reporters come searching for evidence, tourists for beauty, and believers for meaning. But beneath the quiet hum of wind through leaves lies a question no one can quite answer. What or who is awakening this land again? Before we continue, subscribe for more discoveries where faith meets archaeology. And don't forget to turn on notifications for our next revelation from the Holy Land.
Drive a few miles south of Jerusalem, and the hills unfold like a painting brushed by time. Stone terraces, olive trees, and now the shimmer of grape leaves. Locals call this heartland Judea. Archaeologists call it ancient Israel. To farmers here, it's simply home, soil that remembers everything. Long before tanks or treaties, a prophet once said these same mountains would drip with wine. Centuries later, some believe those words are more than poetry. They're coordinates. They plant where Amos once walked, convinced the vineyard itself is the map. Each stake hammered into the earth is half work, half worship. And as sunrise paints the vines gold, another thought rises with it. What happens when Scripture starts growing again?
Two brothers, Yoni and Gadi, worked this land as if every vine were prayer in the ground. Their vineyard sits where maps blur, one ridge from a neighboring village, one heartbeat from dispute. They say planting is their answer to fear. If they stop, they lose more than crops. It's not political speeches keeping this soil alive. It's calloused hands and early morning faith. Locals watch them with quiet respect and a little disbelief. Who chooses to plant a vineyard on a frontier? Yet every season they return with wire, posts, and hope, pressing roots deeper into contested dust. And when the wind shifts east, carrying distant echoes of unrest, they keep working, because the prophecy didn't say it would be easy.
The season promised a good harvest. Clusters hung heavy, the air thick with sweetness and dust. Then, one October morning, the sound of tractors was drowned by sirens. War had returned. Yoni's phone rang first, then Gadi's, both called to serve in the defense forces. In a single hour, pruning shears became rifles. The vines that had survived drought and stones now stood alone under the sun. For a moment, the brothers hesitated, staring at the fields they had nursed from seed. "Who will guard the vineyard?" one asked. There was no answer, only wind moving through the rows like a restless spirit. As they left, every step felt like a promise deferred. But promise has a way of waiting. When the trucks rolled out, the vineyard didn't fall silent. Gadi's wife stood in the field with 5 children and a single prayer: keep life holding on. They watered at dawn, when the air was still cool, learning which leaves to trim, which grapes to save. The children played between the rows, but their games sounded more like work songs now. Every sapling seemed to lean toward them, needing touch and courage. At night, they listened to distant thunder that wasn't weather, whispering verses for strength. Weeks stretched into months, and still the vines clung stubbornly to their posts. She told the children, if the roots hold, so will we. But even faith, like wine, takes time to age. When Yoni and Gadi returned months later, dust still clung to their uniforms, but the vineyard had surprised them. It was alive. New shoots had climbed the wires, leaves wide as open hands. They stood in disbelief, whispering the old words their grandfather once recited: the land would bloom again. No miracle lights filled the sky, only quiet proof in the soil.
To them, that was miracle enough. They spoke of Amos not as legend, but as witness, a man whose promise still echoed through root and rain. Yet even as they harvested in relief, both sensed a deeper unease. The prophecy spoke of abundance, but it also warned of a harvest that arrives faster than anyone can gather. As news of the vineyard spread, officials and visitors began to arrive. Cameras, microphones, speeches. Leaders called it heritage, proof that faith and policy could share a plow. Across the ocean, allies spoke of solidarity, echoing the idea that these hills rightfully belonged to those who tilled them. But on the horizon, watchtowers still glinted in the heat, and questions about borders held their own root systems. Yanni and Gotti listened politely, their hands stained with soil while words floated like clouds over their heads. For them, the vineyard's meaning wasn't decided in chambers or councils, it was decided every dawn, when they bent to the earth again. Still, between promise and politics, tension waits for harvest. Their story doesn't begin in these hills. It stretches back across oceans and tears. The brothers' grandparents survived camps, ashes, and exile. They arrived in a newborn Israel with little more than seed pouches and a blessing. Plant, their grandfather said, even if the world burns again. Those words still echo through the rows each spring. When Yoni drives fence posts into the ground, he thinks of bones that never found rest. When Gotti waters new vines, he imagines rain washing grief into growth. The vineyard has become more than livelihood. It's an answer whispered to history. Yet every blessing carries a question, and theirs is this: how deep must roots go before they become peace? Time softens battle lines, but here, faith and soil keep the story alive. The vineyard is no longer just a farm. It's a living scripture written in shade and sunlight. Each season reads a different verse. Winter pruning, spring shoots, autumn grapes. Visitors walk between the rows, whispering prayers they hardly understand, sensing that something ancient is breathing again. Scientists may call it climate recovery, economists call it enterprise, yet the farmers call it prophecy unfolding. They believe every vine hints at a greater chapter still unwritten. And when night falls over the ridges and the air smells of crushed fruit and dust, a quiet question lingers like wine on the tongue. What comes after fulfillment? At dawn, the light spills over the hills like a slow revelation. The brothers walk the vineyard's edge, boots turning dew to steam. The grapes are ready, heavy with rain, sweat, and waiting. Somewhere beyond the ridge, news of conflict hums again. Yet here the air feels almost still, as if holding its breath. They lift a cluster, taste the first drop, and everything, the war, the prophecy, the 1,000-year ache, folds into that single sweetness. But this is not the end. The scripture that circles their lives speaks of planting and rebuilding, not resting. As they leave the vineyard, the sun climbs higher, and one thought stirs like wind through the vines. Prophecies don't end. They take root.